web development, and in particular JQuery. Wanted to go over um, implementing solutions using JQuery, and hopefully that should help you in your Visual Force programming. We are not going to be very specific in terms of Visual Force. Whatever examples that we do in this few sessions, we will primarily focus it purely from a jQuery perspective. So the server-side component can either be Visual Force or JSPs or your ASP.NET. It shouldn't matter what the server-side technology is. The idea is to understand how jQuery can be leveraged. So that being said, let's quickly go through the introductions. As I told earlier, my name is Vikram Datla. I'm one of the principals in Docmation along with Prasad, and we have been implementing this web and content management solutions for the past 18 years. I am based out of New Jersey, and we primarily implement solutions for life sciences and publishing and financial sectors. So whatever examples that I do, I'll try to keep them pertinent in the context of the industry that you might be working in. Okay, so can we just quickly have a roll call to see who is on the call? I see quite a few signed up, and I don't know most of them. When you introduce yourself, do let me know what your background is so that we can tailor accordingly the next few sessions that we might have. Okay. So with that being said, can you just get started on who is on the call? I see Anita. Anita, are you there?
This is Anita.
Hi, Anita.
Hi. Actually, I have knowledge in programming, but I've never worked in programming. I mean, I came from a testing background.
Okay.
So I have knowledge in programming side.
So are you familiar with any programming or purely testing, Anita?
No, first I started with VB. Actually, I know VB programming.
Okay, okay, good. And you've done primarily client-server development or web development?
Web development.
Okay, so you might have done work on ASP using VB script and all of that.
Yes, I know all these things.
Okay, so, okay, great. Divya?
Hi Vikram, this is Divya. I actually came with an internet marketing background, and right now I'm getting trained in Salesforce. So as a part of Salesforce training, I learned quite a bit Java, core Java, and Java basics. And I know a little bit of HTML and CSS. Other than that, I don't have any programming background.
Okay, that's fine. Kiran? I see Kiran Vikas being signed up, and I'm just going with the names that are listed in here and go to meeting. Okay, Rani?
Yeah, hi Vikram. I recently joined as a Salesforce developer, so maybe I might be using jQuery and JavaScript in developing the Visual Force pages from now on. So that's why I'd like to learn more about jQuery.
Good. Vijay?
Hi, my name is Vijay, and I did my master's in electrical engineering. But I have basics on Visual Force and Apex. Other than that, I don't have any experience related to web development.
Okay.
2 years of experience in development in PLSQL. I have a basic knowledge of Java, HTML, and CSS.
Okay, great. Uma?
Hi, this is Uma. I have experience, around 2 years of experience in SharePoint development. I'm familiar with C#, JavaScript, Ajax. That's all.
Good. Did I miss anybody else?
Yes, I'm Harita here.
Hi, Harita.
I have an experience in ASP.NET and C#.NET. Other than that, I don't have any knowledge in any programming languages.
Right. But ASP.NET is web-based, right? So you're familiar with web development.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay. So we'll get started. As I said earlier, if everybody can go on mute. Feel free to ask me any questions in the middle of the presentation. We want it to be very interactive. And one thing I forgot to mention was that we have been doing this training for a while now, for probably the past 10 years. In the last few years, I started focusing purely on project work. So as part of documentation, we execute various projects in the life sciences space. So I kind of took a break from trading in the last 4 or 5 years. But from my background perspective, we did quite a bit of Documentum, JQuery, .NET training in the past for our consultants, not for outside institutions, but we have done that in the past. And typically, I am better prepared for any of the sessions than what I currently am. I happened to have a chat with Prasad last week, and we decided to have this session. And I unfortunately didn't have time to put relevant slides together. So I quickly scrambled whatever I could in the last hour or so and put it in. But maybe for the next session, I should have better slides. We are recording this session, so if you guys want to take a look at it later on, you can do that. The main objective of this training is not just to give you an idea about JQuery, but also to make you guys comfortable in coding with JQuery. I mean, some of you don't have any programming background. So in that perspective, since we are doing it for all, I might be touching upon some very basic concepts that you guys might be already familiar with. But we'll not be dwelling too much time on it. It will be a kind of a quick tour. But just to ensure that everybody is on the same page and they are able to relate to whatever examples that we are doing. So that being said, we'll move on to the slides. I would like the session to be interactive so that I mean, we can have a dialogue rather than me just talking about whatever I have to present. Some of you don't have any web development experience, so in that regard, we'll touch upon on a few basics. All of us talk about your web application development, and most of you are in Salesforce. So most of the applications that you're probably going to work on is migrating from Siebel, which is more of a client-server application than a web-based application. So in that perspective, you're going to see some challenges that are typically there from a web application perspective. We recently implemented a project for Novartis where they were migrating from Siebel to Salesforce, and users would constantly complain that I had this feature in Siebel, why can't you guys support the same level or same feature as it was in Siebel? The challenge there is Siebel is more of a client-server application where you're not relying on a browser to deliver the application to the users. So when you build a client-server application, you are building an app for using the native for a particular OS, and you can, since you're building it for a specific kind of a platform, you have more flexibility in doing that, in implementing features that are there. So web over a period of time, it has really evolved, and these days we talk about rich internet applications, HTML5 based applications and stuff. And when we are talking about those applications, we are talking about implementing feature set that are close to what was there in the client-server world. I'll give you a simple example. Your banking applications 5 or 6 years back, or even a decade back, used to be all client-server applications, because the interfaces needed quite a bit of richness and then interactivity. So if I'm looking at my accounts information, I needed multiple views so that I can quickly drill through, and that user experience could not be replicated through a web application that is essentially presented through the browser. So there are quite a few limitations in the context of web versus client-server, and although there are also fundamental differences in architecture when we talk about client-server and web applications. When we talk about a web application, the primary driver for your web applications is your HTTP specifications, your HTTP protocol. Using HTTP, you are able to communicate with a server that is out there remotely and download some data and present it in a browser. If the downloaded data contains HTML tags in it, the browser is able to interpret that data and display that file to the users in the browser. But if the file that I'm downloading from the remote place is a Word document or an Excel document, does the browser try to display that information? It doesn't. Instead, it launches your native application like Microsoft Word or Acrobat PDF that is there on the user's computer to open the document. So the key elements that primarily helped in building your web-based platform are your HTTP specification, and once you have the data in HTML format, you would be able to present it to your user base. So most of you don't have any client-server background, but architecturally the difference is, in case of a client-server application, the program or the application that you have developed is running on the client machine itself. So right now, I'm showing you PowerPoint slide, right? The PowerPoint slide, the PowerPoint program itself is running on the user's machine. In your web application, you are expecting all the processing to be happening on the server side and data to be presented in HTML format. So let's say in this PowerPoint slide, I had a macro, or I implemented a macro that goes and fetches some information from the database. In that case, that piece of program is again running on my computer, on each individual user's computer. In case of your web applications, the majority of the times, your applications are processing or processing all the data on the remote server and sending you the data in HTML, and the browser is just displaying that information. So architecturally, client-server and web applications are totally different. In case of a web application, the idea is that all the processing is happening on a remote server, and then you download the information onto the local user's machine in a browser and present it to the user. So that is a brief overview of your web applications background. I wanted to touch upon a few nomenclature that you commonly used when you talk about web application development. Can you guys tell me the difference between internet and intranet?
Internet
anybody?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Internet is, through web base, and the intranet is within the company.
Right. Right. So internet is the public web, and intranet, you can call it as a private web, where you are essentially retrieving the information within your organization. But whether it is internet or intranet, the underlying protocol that you are using to get the information is always HTTP, right? If you want to go to a website, you always enter HTTP : Microsoft.com. What is happening in the background is the Microsoft.com alias is being translated into an IP address, and the request is all the servers that are out there on the web have a unique IP address using which they are identified. So your request is sent to the remote web server, and from the web server, if you don't enter in any information for a specific file, it is downloading a file called index.html or default.html, whatever is configured on the web server. So by using HTTP as the protocol, you are going and fetching information from the remote server. HTTP doesn't mean that you are doing any processing. HTTP is a protocol that is used to work with resources on a remote server. These resources can either be accessed, which means when you type in the URL http microsoft.com, you are requesting for a file called index.html and downloading it onto the user's machine, even though you haven't entered a URL explicitly. So the main difference between so HTTP, or you have other kinds of protocols like your emails. Your mails are based on SMTP protocol. In any of these protocols, whether it be HTTP or SMTP or FTP, all of them use the same underlying principles, which is based on TCP/IP for communication. I want to work with some remote resource. The protocol that I'm using is at the lowest level, it's TCP/IP, and depending on how I'm using it, I am either using HTTP protocol or FTP protocol or SMTP. All of these protocols are based on the TCP/IP. Can any of you guys tell me the difference between HTTP and FTP? Even in FTP, I'm able to transfer files from a remote server, or I'm able to put in files onto a remote server. So that being the case, can you guys tell me the difference between HTTP and FTP? Okay, so in case of HTTP, it is called as a stateless protocol. It is not a stateful protocol like FTP. What do I mean? What do I mean by a stateless protocol? Let's say if I go to a website here, and I'm going to Microsoft.com. When I go to this website, I have some text that is being displayed. So as you can see, the default file that it fetched from the server is default.aspx, and what it has sent is essentially the HTML code that the browser is interpreting and displaying to me. As part of this particular request, you'll see that it is referencing quite a few images and stuff. And for each one of the images, when it sends the HTML, it sends the URL for that particular image that would be downloaded from the server. So here I'm just trying to look for. So here you have an image HTML tag, and here you see that your source is referencing a URL for the Microsoft logo. So in this particular page, when I request default.aspx, the HTML that I get back potentially contains URLs for other images that need to be displayed as part of this page. So let's say I have 5 images in this page along with the HTML text. How many HTTP requests do you think are being sent to the server? So in order to retrieve this default.aspx, when I put in this request on the server, the default.aspx is generating the application server is processing this particular file and generating a HTML, and the HTML response is being displayed here. So that is one request. For each image, it is again doing a round trip to the server to retrieve the file. So if I have 5 images in this particular document that is being displayed, I have 6 requests being sent to the server. 6 HTTP requests being sent to the server. That's why your page load, sometimes the images takes a while to load, because that's a separate HTTP request that is going to the server. So in case of HTTP, in order to fetch the files, it has to make a round trip to the server and download the file. Each request to the server takes a different path. If I have to go from, let's say, New Jersey to Atlanta, there are 10 different ways I can go to Atlanta. I don't have to take the same path in order to go to Atlanta. Similarly, out there on the web, when you're requesting a file from this particular server, there are 10 different ways to get this information, to reach that resource and retrieve the appropriate information. When you say it's a stateless protocol, each request, the connection is not fixed between your browser, the machine on which I'm trying to view this particular file, and the server on which this particular resource exists. Each and every request potentially takes a different path in order to get the information back. In case of FTP, it is connection oriented. So once you establish a FTP connection between a server and a client, if you are transferring 10 files, all of those files are downloaded using the same path. All of them take the same path, and until you disconnect, that connection is maintained. In the case of HTTP, the moment the resource is sent from the server, a connection between my browser instance and the file on the and the app server that is out there remotely is no longer maintained. So HTTP in that regard is not connection oriented, whereas FTP is connection oriented. If you take the case of SMTP, simple mail transfer protocol that is used for your emails, it is kind of an indirect way, because I mean, when somebody sends you an email, you don't get it right away. The mail servers are polling to see if there are any requests that they need to serve, and they are retrieving the information through a background mechanism. The point I'm trying to make here is that HTTP is fundamentally not a connection-oriented protocol. Idea behind HTTP is to work with the resource out there on the remote server, remote web server, and using HTTP, you can either retrieve a file from the server, or you can put a resource on the server, and using HTTP can even, if you look at the HTTP specification, you can even request deletion of resources on the server. We'll go over the HTTP methods and stuff later on when we talk about RESTful services, because they are also important from your Salesforce integration perspective. Do you guys know what is the difference between HTTP and HTTPS? Anybody? So HTTPS is nothing but it is meant to make the information that is sent across the network secure. So in case of HTTPS, if I'm sending the data back, all of the information that I'm sending is actually encrypted and sent to the browser. If the browser has the certificate, a client certificate using which the data was encrypted, your information is going to be decrypted and displayed by the browser. But if some hacker looks for this network traffic and gets the data packets, they wouldn't be able to easily break the data that is there in those packets and read it. So if you are going to any banking website, you'll see that it automatically puts you on HTTPS and not on HTTP. So here I have, so if I go to http:/bankofamerica.com, it automatically redirects me onto HTTPS. The reason being, I mean, you are exchanging sensitive information, so all of this data is going to be encrypted and sent across the network. The next thing that I want to talk about is HTML and CSS. Most of you know what HTML is. HTML is hypertext markup language, which a browser understands, and when you include your information as part of HTML, the browser is able to display it. So if you look at this Bank of America page, you'll see that there's a whole bunch of HTML along with JavaScript that is being plugged in and displayed. When you display this information, you want some styling. I'm not just putting in a text box here. I want it to be highlighted in dark brown color and things like that. So when you are trying to present some information, there you want to do some branding around it so that it looks good for the user. That styling is typically accomplished using your CSS or cascading style sheets, using which you can define styles, and the moment you define certain styles, the browser displays that particular information. How many of you have created HTML pages in the past?
I created static pages.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to create a simple HTML page that will probably develop over a period of time. In order to create a HTML page, let's not worry about dynamic pages. Let's create some static pages. What do we mean by static? We don't have any processing happening on the server side to go fetch data or save data. In this case, we are just hard coding whatever HTML that needs to be sent to the users. What is the structure of a typical HTML page? You have HTML, and then you have the header section in which you define some generic tags like, let's say, title that would be displayed on the top of the page, top of your browser. And then what else would you include in the header section? You would probably include the JavaScript pages that you are using and any style sheets that you are using. In this case, I'm not going to use anything, and I'm going to just put in just define a basic structure for your HTML page. So as part of your HTML page, you have a header section, a body, and your HTML page starts with HTML and ends with HTML tags. So let's say I save this as a HTML file, and I'm going to save it locally on this machine. So I saved it with the extension .html. So if I try to view the file, so as you can see here, I just opened this file. Right now, since I'm accessing this file locally, it says the protocol to be, it doesn't specify the protocol here. I'm directly giving the path to the file. But if you put the same file on the web server, you will be entering a HTTP URL and then the IP address or the alias for the server on which you have deployed this particular file. And here I'm displaying this information. Let's say I want to make this page colorful. So if I want to change the background, I can do background equal to, and in order to change the text color, I'll say I think So as you can see here, I included the styling information here, and then I may change the color of your text that is being displayed. This works, but ideally in a HTML page, what you want to put is just the information that you want to display. The styling information is meant to be externalized in a CSS file. So you do have the ability to define the style information within within the HTML page itself using the style tags, but this is not a recommended way to do it. Since we are going to see progressively how things are going to get better, I'm just doing this example. So some of you might not have worked with style sheets. In order to define, let's say, a custom class in style sheet, when I say a class, we attribute we, by class we mean we attribute some styles to it, and when you apply that particular class to an element, whatever styles are associated with that class, that would be immediately assigned to that element. So let's say I want to change the font size or font type. I'm going to say I can do it like this here. And some of these HTML tags you might or might not be familiar, but these are basic HTML tags. I'm not doing anything fancy here. So div element is used to group or create a layer around the text that you're putting in. And in HTML, when you're programming, you want the ability to be able to access any element and work with it. So it provides me a grouping mechanism, and it is recognized by all your browsers. So here I'm going to say I'm going to use a paragraph, this, and type in some text here. So here, instead of defining the style for your body like this, I'm going to say class equal to, and whatever CSS class that I've defined here. In this case, I said my font is, so now if I save it and take a look at this page, yeah, I think it has changed it, but I forgot to change the color. I might have put in this tags incorrectly. It should have recognized it. I probably put in the tag name incorrectly. That's why it's not picking it up. I will just test it in Visual Studio. Typically, when you're working with HTML, you work with some editors. You don't work with Notepad like I am doing right now. So for Java, you would be using your Eclipse editor. For .NET applications, you would be using your Visual Studio, and for your Visual Force, you probably work with your IDE or using the web interface itself. So in all of those cases, it would just a second. I'm going to share it from a different machine where I have Visual Studio working. So just give me a minute. Okay, so this was the mistake that I did earlier. It is not font color, the property is just color. And once I said that, as you can see here, it has been changed. Again, it is not necessary to remember all of these properties, because when you work with an IDE, it essentially prompts you with whatever it is. The moment I type in font, it gives me exactly whatever you want to put in there. So the reason why I was presenting this example was to show you that typically this is how an inexperienced user would probably code it. So along with this, let's say I have some form that I'm creating. Okay, and as part of this, I want to let's say I want to accept user credentials. So I'm going to use a simple table in so how many of you are familiar with simple HTML stuff? Can you guys tell me how you create how you can create rows and columns in a table? You use tr to create a row, ed to create a column in it. So here I'm creating one column in which I'm going to display a text called login ID. And here I want to be able to, I want to have the user enter in, enter the login ID. So I'm going to create some form elements within the HTML page. It's always, when you were working with form elements, it's always good to give a name and ID to the elements so that you can access them through your script. So in this case, I'm going name and ID. Typically, you give it the same values. So here, what I did was, I created a row in a table in which there are two columns, login ID, and then in the second column, I entered I asked the user to enter the login ID in a text box. Similarly here, I'm going to put in another row where I want the user to enter a password, and in this case I'm not saying it as a text, I'll enter it as password, or the type of field as password, and I'm going to change. You can merge multiple columns using this tag called call span. So in this case, I'm saying that this cell is going to span 2 columns, and it is going to just contain a button called These examples might be too basic for some of you. The reason I'm doing it these examples is, as we go through these sessions, I'm going to show you how easily you are able to define a clear structure around your code, and how easily things are accomplished using JQuery. So in that context, even if you're familiar with this, just bear with me. I don't think the next sessions are going to be this basic. But for some of you who are not familiar with HTML, this is to give you an idea as to how your typical HTML pages are. So in this HTML page, I put in some styling information. I've also put in some input elements using which I want to gather information and perform some validations. Since some of you are familiar with JavaScript, I'm also going to put in some JavaScript code here. Can any of you tell me how to write JavaScript code in your web pages? If you want to insert JavaScript code, you always use a script tag, indicate the type of script that you're doing, so text/JavaScript. Why do we have to put in the type of script? Because you have other scripting languages. VB script is one that IE recognizes, but none of the other browsers recognize VB script. So the default standard is JavaScript for all your browsers. So here I'm writing a script called on login. I would like to validate what inputs or whether the user has entered valid values or not. So I'm writing a method called validate inputs, and here in this validate inputs method, I want to check whether the user has entered a valid login ID or not. Can any of you tell me how do you access the value in this login element using using the code, using JavaScript?
Document
Variables.
So you rely on what is called as the browser object model or the document object model. So right now what you're doing is, whatever code that you are writing, where is it executing? It is executing in the context of your browser. The language that the browser understands is JavaScript. Can somebody, I think your mute is off. Can you go on mute? Okay. So when you write code in your JavaScript, your browser understands it, and the browser provides an object model using which you can manipulate either the content that is displayed in the browser, or if you want to retrieve some data that has been entered or populate some data into that page, you can do that. So we will be going over those details, but in the browser, in the object model, in the browser object model, there's at the root there's an object called window. Window means this entire instance. Within that window, if I say document, I'm referencing this particular document, and in that particular object, you can access any elements that are there in that particular page. So typically in a HTML page, when you have data being entered, in the body tag, you will always have a HTML tag called as form. So again, form is like any other input element. You can provide a name and ID, and then you also have other methods which we'll not talk about for now. So your data is always put in the context of a form. So if I look at the overall structure, when I said window.document essentially is talking about any content that is part of your body tag. Okay. Within this document object, if I want to access individual elements, there are various methods, various objects that your browser provides using which I would be able to access the content. So in this case, I'm interested in accessing the value in this txt login button. So what would be my JavaScript code here? So if by default you don't need to include window because that is the root. Even if you don't specify anything, it always assumes window to be the root. So I'll have I can say window.document, or I can just say document. I'm looking at this document object that the browser supports. I can just say get element by ID. This is a method within that object document, and I can give a unique ID. Do all of you see my screen here?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. So here in this method, I'm trying to retrieve the value entered by the user in txt login when the user clicks on this button. So I'm saying get document dot get element by ID. I'm specifying the ID field that I've used when I'm defining the element, and I'm saying value. So what I'll do is in JavaScript, I'll declare a variable called login ID, and I'm going to store this value to this particular value to this particular variable. In JavaScript, you don't define, you don't have data types like in Java or .NET or even your Apex programming. All of them are dynamic in nature. So if you have to declare a variable, you just say variable and then the name of the variable, and you don't need to specify the data type. By data type, I mean whether it is an integer, string, or array, or whatever that is. You don't need to define that. So when I do this, similarly, I want to fetch the password that has been entered by the users. So I'm going to say txt password. So if login ID is empty, or so I'll say if login ID, I mean if you're doing comparison operator, you'll have to say double equal to in JavaScript, or password is empty. I would like the user to, I'm making sure that I'm entering my syntax correctly. If this condition is true or this condition is true, then I want to display a message saying, in order to display a message, the window object has got a method called alert. So instead of saying window.alert, I'm just typing in alert because the browser always assumes that. Invalid credentials. Okay, so
Vikram, I have one question here in the statement, the login ID equal to null or password equal to null, right?
Oh yes, sorry, I mistyped it. Yeah. Equal to null. Yeah, you're right. And what I'm going to do is, all your input elements have events associated with them. By events, I mean when you click on the button, it is an event. If you double click on the button, it's an event. If you mouse over the button, it is an event. So pretty much all elements that you see in a typical HTML page have events associated with them. If I have a drop-down button, if I change the value in a drop-down button, the event that is fired is called as on-change events. So typically when you write your code, it is in response to an event that has been triggered by the user performing some action. There are key press events, there are mouse related events, mouse over, mouse out, those kind of things. Those events give us the ability to program the pages so that it gives you a very dynamic look and feel. So when you do a mouse over an image, we might immediately change what the image is and display something else. When you do a mouse out from that image, we might display the original image back. So similarly, for your input elements, the typical event is on click. What happens when the user clicks on this button? What I'm saying is, if the user clicks on this button, then call my onLogin JavaScript function. Okay. And this text by default is going to be in black, and the background is not going to help. So I'm going to change the color for all of the text to be white. And if I change this at a body level, it is going to be applied by default to all my elements that are part of the body. So I'm defining it at a parent level so that the properties are propagated across your entire page. Yeah. So here I have inserted in some additional where did the issue come from?
Just above the row, you see that? No, yeah. The first one.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as you can see, what have we done here? Your typical HTML page where you have some styling information, and then I've defined the contents of my HTML page, and the contents included a form in which I'm going to submit data, and this page also contained JavaScript that is part of it. And when you click on this, you are essentially invoking this particular JavaScript function. So this is my login page, and let's say if I don't enter anything and just click on login. The event is not getting fired for some reason. Yeah, I forgot to put in double quotes here. After script type equal to text / JavaScript, I forgot a double quote. Hopefully it should get fired now. So here I'm saying invalid credentials. Just to debug, I put in an extra alert here which will tell me what my login ID is. I'm not going to remove that because here I'm going to enter in an actual value. So here my login ID that has been entered is test, and still the validation has failed. If I enter in some values here, you see that the text that I've entered in this password element has not been displayed because I defined this type as password. So by default, it hides the text. So if I click on login, now it will be successful. Your credentials are valid. So why do we do client-side validations? So that you don't do an unnecessary round trip to the server. As I told you earlier, doing a round trip to the server is expensive. One, you have to pass the data to the server, and then the server has to do the validations on the server side, and then send the validation failure message back. So typically, some people prefer doing validations on the client side. Some people prefer doing validations on the server side. By client side, I mean within the browser itself. By server side, I mean the validations being checked on the remote server. The reason why I did this example is going back to our original discussion. Your HTML and CSS define what information is being presented and how it looks and feels. Your JavaScript essentially helps manipulate your object model. In this case, I displayed the alert message in a pop-up window, right? Instead of it being displayed in a pop-up window, let's say I want to just display this text in red. If login ID is not entered, then I want to display a text beside login ID. If password is not entered, then I want to display a text beside the password in the browser window itself, not in the message box. Using your browser's object model and JavaScript, you can pretty much manipulate either the content that is displayed in your page or work with your form elements and stuff. So in this case, I'll show you how I can manipulate it, how I can display this information. Here again in my HTML, there are a few typos. In the first row, any HTML tag that you open needs to be closed. I had TD, I opened this column, I closed this column. For the second column, I forgot to put in the TD tag, but your browsers are very advanced and they understand and they replace those elements, whichever missing elements are there. But if you want to create a HTML page that is XHTML compliant, all your entire document needs to be well formed. When I say well formed, what I mean by that is any tag that I open, any HTML tag that I open needs to be closed. So in this case, input type equal to button. Doing this helps me close it. Okay, so slightly digress there, but what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add another column to each of these rows. And in those columns, I'm going to put in some empty labels. Here I'm going to do call span equal to 3. And these are all HTML tags I'm doing, align equal to center. This is how we used to do it initially, prior to the advent of all these JavaScript libraries like JQuery and HTML5 and CSS. Looking at how we used to do it initially versus how we do it now, you would be able to appreciate and understand why these frameworks are so popular. All of these tasks are so painful with the old way we used to do, and they are just done with a click of with just 1 or 2 lines of code. So here I'm going to put in a div element, and I'm going to give it a name. So I'm going to say as I told you, for any HTML element, you always have 2 fields using which you can identify them. You can use ID and a name field. The reason why you should use both is some of the frameworks use mostly the ID fields, and that's why I'm putting in both an ID and a name field here. Similarly, I'll put in okay, and here I'm going to declare another class called error message, and I can associate any HTML element with a particular CSS class using the class property. And what I would be doing is, I was talking earlier about the object model, right? So here I'll change my code slightly because I want to display whether the login ID was not entered or the password was not entered. So here, instead of displaying that message box, I'll say if login ID is empty. How did we access the element earlier, your input element, using this property, right? So I can use the same property, and in this case, if it is a login ID, I'm going to name this element as login message. And the object model gives me a method called inner HTML, and I can just say okay. So as you can see here, what I'm doing using the JavaScript object model that's exposed by the browser, I'm retrieving this element and I'm dynamically inserting this particular text in there. Similarly, for password, I want to display a similar message, and for password, so now let's go back and see how this page would look like. I'm not going to enter any value. I forgot to remove that message. This inner HTML might be in capital letters. So as you can see here, this information was not part of the original HTML page, but from a user's perspective, so this element didn't have any text in it. But from a user's perspective, we gave them the look and feel that we made probably a round trip to the server and displaying this HTML dynamically. So using the browser's object model, which is called as DOM or document object model, you can essentially access any input elements that are there in a page. You can modify the look and feel of any components. Like if I want to change the color of this that is being displayed in yellow, I can change through JavaScript to a different color altogether. Or I can insert new content or data into your web page wherever I want to. So your DOM gives us a mechanism to manipulate the page that you are working with. Okay. Typically, JavaScript for programming is all about working with the browser's object model, and JavaScript as a language itself gives you a few functions. So here, JavaScript allows you to define this variables using var, but this information is coming from the object model that is exposed by your browser. So using JavaScript, you work with the browser's object model to manipulate the information that is being presented to the user. Typically, it is used for validations and stuff to ensure that the user has entered all the data, but if you want to create some animation effects, you are essentially able to do all of that by working with the browser's object model in JavaScript. Okay, so in a typical HTML page, you have your styling information, your scripting information, and the actual HTML content that is there. This particular file that I'm showing you is not the right way to code it. Ideally, the way or the recommended or the best practice is to put in all your styling information into an external CSS file. So you create a file with CSS extension and you put your styling information there. You shouldn't be putting in styling information into your HTML tags. So this is not a good way to do it. So here I said body style equals background color black and the text color is white. The right way to do it would be to define this information in a style sheet so that your presentation is separated from the actual data that is being presented to the user. So if I have to do it the right way, instead of me defining the color there, I would have defined it this is Notepad, it doesn't return what I've done, so I could have just said, so in style sheets, when you define your style sheet classes, if you're defining custom styles, you put in a dot prefix. But if you want your styles to be applied to your regular HTML elements, in this case, I want whatever I wrote earlier in the body tag, I want to put it here. So I can just put in that HTML tag without the dot notation. Dot makes it a custom class. In this case, wherever I have a body tag, I'm saying background color is blue and text color is white. So without me defining a class separately, now it should apply it for this particular element. So if I now refresh this page, so you'll see that my page has turned into blue and all of this has been changed. So in your regular HTML elements, it's expected that you don't put in your styling information. And the styling information should also not be part of your HTML page itself. It should be part of your of a separate CSS file. So instead of it being here in this particular page, ideally the way you want to do it is to copy this information into a separate file. Okay. Save it as a CSS file. I saved it as a text file and then reference it from here. Similarly, the JavaScript code, you don't want a JavaScript code to be in the HTML page itself. You want to copy this code, save it into a separate JS file, and then through your script tag, you have to just reference it. So the idea behind doing this is to put in your code, your look and feel, and the actual content into separate files, so that if you have to correct, let's say, the look and feel, you're just modifying the style sheet and it is immediately reflected. The other advantage you have is the same style sheet can be repurposed across all the pages in your web application. You're not going to have a single page. So instead of defining body style in each and every HTML page I create, I would rather put it in a style sheet and just reference the style sheet in all my pages. So making a style sheet change would reflect in your entire web application, and you don't have to modify each and every page that is out there. So this was meant to give you, for those of you who don't have any HTML web background, a brief overview of what HTML is, what style sheets are, what JavaScript is. Any questions?
Yeah, Vikram, I have a question. Vikram.
Yeah, Rani, go ahead.
In the script, we use two functions. One is login ID and the validate inputs. So right. Why are you using two functions?
Just a clean way to write code, Rani. The reason why I would typically do like this is, so ideally I would, after this is done, Rani, I would return a value. So instead of this alert valid credentials, I would say return true. And if the validation fails, I'll return false. Okay, just making my code modular. So here what I would do is,
store that value.
okay, so I would write my code like this.
Oh.
So if my result is true, then I continue with the remaining processing that I have to do, which is to submit this page to a server-side component and then do whatever running.
Oh.
And if it fails, then I don't do anything. So the reason I have this function is so that I might have other piece of code that is there, which needs to be there, and that is not this function is purely meant for validation. So if some third person comes and looks at my page, okay, I need to add one more validation to ensure that the login ID only has alpha characters and no alphanumeric. That piece of code would only go in here, and it wouldn't have any impact on your parent function. Okay. So that's just a cleaner way. A single function would have done it. And here also, I mean, there are multiple ways to access your input elements. Here I said document.getElement by ID. That is one function that I've used. But I could also have said your object model provides to access your input elements through the form in which this child element is. So your browser kind of creates a hierarchy of the objects that are there. So under the body, I had a form tag. Under the form, under the body, there is a table tag. Within the table, I have these rows, columns, and within those, I had this input element. So the browser is kind of building a tree structure using which it is accessing this element. So to access this value in an element, you can also say document.formName, which is the FRM login, which is what we have given, dot txt login dot value. You could have also used this particular method instead of calling it like this. This is the old way of doing it. This is the new way of doing it. And you want to make your functions more modular so that validation is in one function, your actual processing is in a different function. If you have to parse some data that you get back from the server, that's in an altogether different function. So that's why we try to break it up, Rani, and use it. Let's say if I have a function to validate if a piece of text is alphanumeric or not, I would not code it in the validate input functions itself. Instead, I'll say function is alphanumeric, and if this function written, and here I'm expecting the data that needs to be tested to see if it is alphanumeric or not. So here, if data dot index of, if it you can use different what are called as regular expressions to check in one line whether it contains both alphabets as well as numericals. I'm not going to list it here, but the idea is this is alphanumeric function might not be pertinent just for your login page. It could be used somewhere else, like say if I have a contact us form, I can use this is alphanumeric function there also to check if some other inputs is alphanumeric or not. So the idea is to make sure that you are repurposing the code, and that is what we mean by making it modular. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So this browser object model, again, since most of you are new to it, you don't need to remember anything. Just try to work on your regular applications or some simple examples, and you will know it over a period of time. And typically there are a few things like get element by ID and a few other things that we would be discussing in this session, which you need to be familiar with. Otherwise, in general, you need to know the basics. In order to fetch any element, I should be able to access either by ID or by some other means. In order to update any element, either the value or the look and feel of it, you would be able to do it using the browser's object model. And there are zillions of examples out there for any specific need that you might have. And we will be covering a few, so don't be worried about whether you know this particular object or not. Just focus on the basics. Okay, so sorry, somebody had a question. So going back to the discussion, so is everybody clear about HTML, hypertext markup language? These are just tags using which you are telling the browser to either to present information in a particular way or to position somewhere. So the layout and the content that needs to be displayed. CSS is for your styling, making the look and feel or the layout completely changed using your style sheets. In CSS, we looked at a few examples of using custom CSS classes as well as using the standard elements. Anything that starts with dot is a custom class, and this is a standard element. You can define styling for for all your elements. So whatever we did right now, the code runs in the browser, and this we refer to as client-side programming. So in client-side programming, the language that we are using is JavaScript, and we are leveraging the browser's object model to do whatever is needed. Unfortunately, the browser's object model is not exactly the same between different vendors. So thankfully it is mostly the same for most of the browsers. So IE has a slightly different object model compared to Firefox, compared to Safari, compared to Chrome. So because of this incompatibilities, what happens is if I'm writing a JavaScript code, if I am, let's say, coding for IE, I will in order to fetch an element, in order to fetch an attribute of an element, I can just say dot get attribute, and like say if I want to retrieve the CSS class that is being used, I'll have to specify class name. But whereas if I have to do the same thing on Firefox, instead of saying the class name, I'll have to say class. So there are some minor differences because of which what used to happen earlier is we used to code for these different browsers. So we would say if it is IE, in order to determine whether it is IE or Firefox, there are, as part of your object model, you have certain functions which are not recognized in other browsers. So we would say if window.target is recognized, then this means it's Firefox. So if it is Firefox, then use this code. If it is IE, then use this code. So in your JavaScript, you would have both the lines of the code because you want your application to run both on IE and JavaScript. There used to be a lot of duplication because of this cross-browser incompatibilities. And it used to be very painful. That is one of the biggest advantages with going with frameworks like JQuery and Prototype.js or other frameworks that are out there. The cross-browser incompatibilities are automatically taken care of. And when we are talking about incompatibilities, we are talking about the minor differences between the object models of these various browsers. You'll be surprised to know that between IE6 and IE7 and IE8 and IE9, the version numbers, the object models are slightly different. So even from the same vendor, certain objects that were recognized earlier are no longer recognized. And obviously there's been an evolution with HTML5 and all of that. So the new objects are introduced in the data model which are recognized only with the later versions of the browser from the vendor. So certain objects that are available in IE10 are definitely not available in IE6 because at that time HTML5 specification was not yet built. So you would need to take, so when you are coding with JavaScript, you would need to understand where the code is running, on which browser the code is running, and accordingly put in the code for it. Although the differences are minor and not heavy. When we talk about server-side programming, we are talking about all the processing that is happening on the server and the final output that is being sent out. So I was telling you earlier that when you type in a URL like say Microsoft.com or Yahoo.com. Here I said finance.yahoo.com. In HTTP, as part of HTTP specification, the only thing that it can do is get you a resource. When you just enter a URL, it means it's requesting a file from the server, which is the default file. For most of the browser, most of the implementations, it is index file, index.html or default.html. So if I don't specify anything explicitly here, it's looking for that particular file. We earlier went to the Microsoft website, so if I don't enter the exact file, you'll see that it is requested under ENUS folder, a file called default.aspx. So your server-side code in this ASPX file is going to be processed by your application server, which in this case happens to be IIS or Internet Information Server because it's running on Windows, and it is going to generate this HTML. This is the HTML that has been generated. So since the HTML has been sent across the pipe, it is being displayed to the user. So in HTTP, you are always working with resources. You are either retrieving information, or if I want to do a search, I am going to enter some information here, and it is going to be posted just like in your login page. So if I enter some information, I'm sending this information to the server, and the server is returning back this data to me. So as HTTP specification, the web server doesn't do any processing. Your application server does all the processing. When I say application server, the moment it sees an request for a file with .aspx extension, before it lets the web server pass in the file as it is, it processes it, generates the HTML output, and sends it out. These are called as filters. This application server processing interception within your web server. In case of IIS, they are called as ISAPI filters, or your ASP or ASP.NET. It's an ISAPI filter that is running inside of your web server, which is doing the processing and generating HTML output for you. So typically your server-side programming, it is ASP.NET, or with Java you do JSP, JSF. In case of Salesforce, your server-side programming that is generating the HTML output for the browser is Visual Force or Apex. Okay. Somebody had a question: how do I send a variable from client side to server side? You don't send a variable from client side to server side. You send information from client side to server side, right? So as part of HTTP specification, I'll put in so as part of your HTTP specification, the various methods that it supports are called as get, post, put, delete, and there are a few other methods like patch. I mean, we wouldn't need to know all of these methods right now. At this particular point of time, what you would need to know is get and a post. In the earlier example that I showed you, I put in for your login page, I'm saying form in the form tag. I'm saying name is so and so, and then I'm going to say method equals to get, post equal to the page that this information needs to be submitted to on the server. So typically it should be something like this. Okay. Or if you don't enter a complete URL, and if you just enter authenticate.aspx, it expects this file to be in the same location as your hello.html file is on the web server. Okay. So what do I mean by method equal to get or post? The information that is exchanged in your get and post method is sent differently. The same information could be sent across the pipe, but it is sent differently. So you go back to this example. I am going to change my search to okay. This is a regular HTML page, and here I'm clicking on the search button. When I click on the search button, the information that needs to be sent from my client side page to server side is this information that I've entered here. So when I click on it, you'll see here in the URL, it has put in whatever I have entered, and then a few additional things that that it has captured to track me or do whatever. So what is happening here is if any information is exchanged in the URL, it obviously is not a secure way of sending the information, because when you are setting it, when you are sending information in a URL, it is sent in what is called as a HTTP header. Your HTTP, when you send information via HTTP, there are two sections in your HTTP message that is sent across. One is a header, the other one is the body. It is just like your postal mail. When you get the postal mail, your outside cover has your name, the from and the to address. The actual contents are inside the envelope. So similarly, in your HTTP, anything in the URL is what is presented on the cover. So if a postman sees the top of the cover, they clearly know all the information that you're trying to exchange with the other team. But if you put it in an envelope inside, if you put it in a document inside the envelope, seal it, without breaking that envelope, the user cannot see it. So when you send information, you can either send the information as part of the header or as part of the body. When you use a GET request, the information is sent as part of the header or the URL. The URL is essentially what is part of the header. When you send the information using POST, information is sent as part of the body. So it is kind of secure. The user is not sending the information out there. But sending it in the header is one, not secure. Two, has limitations on the amount of information I can send. So if I write a big story here, it wouldn't be able to send all of this information. There is a limit on 2,000 characters is what it can send as part of your HTTP header. 2,048 characters is what it is. So if you have a feedback form, I expect the user to enter the feedback for my site. I don't anticipate to send this information in as a GET request, because the information is going to get truncated. I'm going to send this information as part of HTTP POST. Once the information is sent to the server side, depending on the server side engine, let's say it is ASP.NET, you would say a request.get or a request of whatever this variable is. In this case, my variable is Q, and it will, when I do request of Q on the server side, it will give me clothing wear was the data that was passed. In our earlier example, we passed in login ID, so I would say request of login ID, and I would get that value. If the information is being sent as part of a form, I can say request.form of in ASPX, and it will give me that value. In case of JSP, I would say request.getParameter, and the parameter name for which the value has been assigned is Q, or in the case of login ID, it was called as TXT login ID. So depending on your server-side engine, you would fetch the values. In case of Visual Force, what it does is it tracks the name, so using the name it can retrieve the value. Visual Force is also not doing any magic there. It is just reading the HTTP header or the HTTP body in order to retrieve the information that has been sent across the network. From JavaScript, I cannot directly communicate to my server-side code. From JavaScript, I'm just submitting the information. When I submit the information, I can submit this entire page like this. I can submit the entire page like this, or you have a mechanism called as AJAX, where I'm not sending this entire page. I'm sending only part of the page. I'm only sending the information that I'm interested in, and I don't want the user to be navigated to a separate page. I want this information to be sent in the background to the server and retrieved in the background. I'll show you a few examples regarding that. But other than sending information to the server, JavaScript cannot talk to the server programs directly. Is that clear? HTTP GET and POST. I would need some feedback, because I don't want to go too basic. Whatever we have discussed right now is very basic, and if we want to objectively cover all of the jQuery stuff, we need to be a little faster than where we are. Since I was not familiar with any of you, I thought the background will help, but now I would need feedback so that I can tailor the remaining part of the session or the other sessions we plan to cover. Any questions on JavaScript, HTTP, HTML, style sheets? Okay. Okay. So going on.
Vikram, I have one question, Vikram.
Yeah.
When you said like JavaScript is submitting the data, like we are not sending it directly to the server using JavaScript, right? So
You have, if you want to. So I was talking about the browser's object model, right, Rani?
yeah.
In the browser object model, around 7 or 8 years back, your browsers came up with an object called XML HTTP request object. Okay. So in your code, just like document object that you are using in JavaScript, if I say XML HTTP request and give in a URL and put in any information I want to send, if I'm trying to send the information as part of a GET request, I can just do this. I can just build my URL in JavaScript, and I can just using XML HTTP request object, I can send information to the server. Once I get that data back, I can populate the information in wherever you're looking at. So let's say you go to Yahoo Run. So if I go to Yahoo page here, right, I enter a symbol. So let's say I'm typing Apple, right? As I was typing, it got me all of this information and displayed it without reloading my entire page. Okay. I mean, if I click on from your home, if I go to news, I'm going to a separate page. That is a complete server-side refresh. But in the earlier example, when I'm typing in, as I'm typing in, it is prompting this information. Where do you think it is getting this information from? The way this page was implemented is it contains a JavaScript function which is talking to the server in the background. I mean, even as I'm typing it, it is talking to the server, and it is queried for all companies that whose trade name starts with AAP, and it has retrieved the data, and then just like in the login page, I displayed this on the right hand side, right? It is building these layers and displaying me this information. Okay. So using JavaScript, you do have use cases where you have to post information to the server, get the information back, and then present it to the user. And this is what is called as AJAX programming, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. The reason why it is called as AJAX is earlier the browser used to support this. By asynchronous, we mean without hindering the user. You are doing this in the background, so the user can continue to do whatever he's doing in that particular page, but in the background, the browser is taking responsibility to go talk to the server, get the data back. Once you get the data, I need to pass the data, right? Typically, you would get the data as in XML format. When I get a whole bunch of data, here there are multiple pieces of element. Here I have the company name, the actual trading name, and the index on which it is trading on. So when I'm sending multiple information, I send it as structured data, as an XML. That is what I used to send it earlier. But these days, instead of XML, you send it in as JSON data. JSON is JavaScript object notation. In either cases, whether it is XML or JSON, it is just a different way of representing your information that you are trying to share. But once you get that information, your JavaScript code need to parse that information and create the UI that it wants to display. So that is all part of your Ajax coding. So in a regular scenario, yeah, you wouldn't need to have Ajax coding. If I have to do anything, I'll do a round trip to the server and get it. But in this day and age, especially when you're working with Visual Force, you'll have quite a bit of code where you are communicating in the background running. Okay. Okay. So by now I want all of you to understand the differences between HTTP and HTTPS, the standard methods that you would be using, get and post. The main differences: get, you send the information as part of your HTTP header, and post, you would send the information as part of HTTP body. Get has a limit on the amount of information I can send, so it cannot be more than 2048 characters. HTML, you don't need to know all the HTML tags. I mean, you wouldn't be coding like I did right now. I did it that way so to give you an idea. So typically you would be working with IDEs where all of this is mostly populated for you. But it would be good to have some information regarding what the various HTML tags are. These other methods, we'll be covering them later, but as part of HTTP specification, it essentially defines a number of methods using which you can work with resources on the server. We have also looked at style sheets. Most importantly, I want you to understand the key differences between server-side programming and client-side programming. And in client-side programming, JavaScript is the language using which you are working with the browser's object model. Anything you are doing in the browser, whether it be the look and feel, manipulation through code, or retrieving data, or communicating in the background, all of that is done using the browser's object model. Any other questions